Legends don't just happen. They're born, shaped by the shadows of history. But what kind of man becomes a legend? In the heart of 15th century Europe there was chaos, war, betrayal, and from it rose a name: Vlad Tepes. To some, he was a savior of his people. To others, a bloodthirsty monster. But to understand Vlad, we must begin at the world that created him. A fractured land, enemies to every side, and a ruler whose reign would define terror itself. This is the story of a man who became a myth. Before the Impaler, there was the dragon. Vlad Dracula II, a man whose name was forged in the fires of war and betrayal. As a member of the legendary Order of the Dragon, his mission was clear: defend Christendom against the rising Ottoman tide. But alliances are like swords, sharp, fragile, and often double-edged. Caught between the Ottoman Empire to the south and the Christian kingdoms to the north, Dracula had to play both sides. He pledged loyalty to Christian kings, but he also bent the knee to the Sultan, securing peace at a cost. His decisions saved Wallachia for a time, but in the shadows, a young boy watched and learned. That boy was Vlad Tepes. Did Vlad learn strategy or treachery? Strength, or the seeds of something darker? His father's choices would not only shape Wallachia, they would shape a legend. To understand the son, we must first understand the father. In 1442, Wallachia was a fragile principality, caught between the Christian kingdoms of Hungary and the expanding Ottoman Empire. Its ruler, Vlad Dracula II, faced an impossible choice: submit to the Ottomans or risk destruction. After a failed military campaign against the Hungarians, Vlad Dracula sought to appease the Ottomans, ensuring Wallachia's survival. As a guarantee of his loyalty, Sultan Murad II demanded his two young sons, Vlad and Radu. Vlad and his younger brother Radu were sent to the Ottoman court in Edirne. The boys were hostages, symbols of their father's promise to remain a vassal of the Sultan. It was a calculated gamble. Dracula hoped to secure peace with the Ottomans while maintaining his fragile rule in Wallachia. But for the young boys, this was no ordinary captivity. At the Sultan's court, they were educated in language, philosophy, and the art of war. Vlad excelled in military strategy, mastering the very tactics the Ottomans would later use against his homeland. But captivity was not without its price. Vlad's life in Edirne was marked by cruelty and fear. He was often beaten for his defiance, a punishment meant to break his spirit. Meanwhile, his brother Radu took a different path. Radu embraced the Ottoman culture, converting to Islam and earning the favor of Sultan Murad II. In time, he would become a close companion and, perhaps, lover of the future Sultan Mehmed II. But Vlad refused to yield. He resented his captors and viewed their power with contempt. Instead of submission, he learned patience. Instead of loyalty, he studied their methods, their weaknesses, and how they used fear to control their enemies. In 1447, everything changed. Back in Wallachia, Vlad's father, Dracula, and his eldest brother, Mircea, were betrayed and killed by boyars loyal to Hungary. With his family destroyed, Vlad became a political pawn. Released by the Ottomans in 1448, he was sent back to Wallachia to claim the throne as their puppet ruler. But Vlad was no puppet. The boy who had entered captivity had become a man forged in betrayal and vengeance. He would reclaim his throne not as a servant of the Ottomans, but as a ruler who would redefine terror itself. Meanwhile, his brother Radu remained loyal to the Ottomans. The two brothers, once inseparable, would become enemies, locked in a rivalry that would shape the future of Wallachia. What began as a father's desperate decision ended with two brothers on opposite sides of history. Wallachia, a kingdom at the crossroads of empires, where betrayal was currency and power was measured in blood. In 1456, Vlad Tepes returned to Wallachia as a man determined to reclaim his homeland. His rise to power came in the aftermath of chaos. Hungary's defeat of the Ottomans in Belgrade left Wallachia exposed and vulnerable. Vlad seized the throne, overthrowing his rival Vladislav II in single combat. But taking the throne was just the beginning. Vlad knew that Wallachia's greatest threat wasn't the armies of Hungary or the Ottomans. It was its own noble class, the boyars, whose betrayal had cost his father and brother their lives. And so, Vlad acted swiftly. On Easter Day in 1457, he invited the boyars to a grand feast at his court in Targovište. It was a lavish celebration, the tables piled high with food and wine. But as the nobles toasted their host, Vlad's soldiers surrounded the hall. Some of the boyars were executed on the spot, their blood soaking the floor of the great hall. The rest, those who were younger and stronger, were spared. But not for mercy. Vlad forced them to march barefoot to the ruins of Poenari, a grueling 50-mile journey through the Carpathian Mountains. Once they arrived, these boyars were made to build Vlad's fortress, stone by stone, a monument to his absolute power. Vlad didn't stop with the boyars. To secure his rule, he turned his attention to his enemies, both foreign and domestic. He fortified Wallachia's defenses and restructured its economy, but his most infamous acts were reserved for those who dared to defy him. He became known for a punishment so brutal that it would define his name for centuries: impalement. Enemies of the state, whether traitorous Wallachians, Saxon merchants, or Ottoman invaders, were impaled on towering stakes and displayed for all to see. Entire forests of the dead lined the roads leading into Wallachia, a gruesome warning to anyone who thought to challenge Vlad's authority. It was not cruelty for its own sake. It was strategy. By ruling through fear, Vlad ensured order in a land long divided by treachery and rebellion. Under his rule, crime vanished. Merchants traveled freely without fear of bandits. And for the first time in years, Wallachia knew stability. To his people, he was a hero, a defender of Wallachia's independence. To his enemies, he was Vlad the Impaler. And to history, he remains one of the most controversial figures ever to wield power. Empires remember victories, but they never forget humiliation. For Sultan Mehmed II, the defeat at Belgrade in 1456 was a bitter wound, but Wallachia's defiance under Vlad Tepes, that was an insult. By 1462, Wallachia had become a thorn in the Ottoman Empire's side. Vlad refused to pay tribute, breaking the uneasy peace. Instead, he raided Ottoman outposts along the Danube, leaving behind a trail of devastation and bodies. But this wasn't just war, it was psychological warfare. Entire villages were burned, crops destroyed, Ottoman soldiers and civilians alike impaled on stakes as warnings. This was Vlad's message to the Sultan. You may march into Wallachia, but you will not leave unscarred. For Sultan Mehmed II, this was more than rebellion. It was a challenge to his empire's authority. So in the spring of 1462, the Sultan marched with an army of over 100,000 men, one of the largest ever assembled to invade Wallachia. But Vlad did not meet him in open battle. Instead, He turned Wallachia itself into a weapon. Fields were scorched, wells poisoned. The Ottomans marched deeper into Wallachia, only to find hunger, disease, and death waiting for them. And then came the night attack. Under the cover of darkness, Vlad led a daring raid directly into the heart of the Ottoman camp. His target, the Sultan himself. In the chaos, fires erupted, soldiers panicked, and the Ottomans suffered heavy casualties. Though Vlad failed to reach Mehmed, he left an indelible mark on the Sultan's army and on history. But when the Ottomans reached Targovishte, they found something far worse than a battlefield. A forest of impaled bodies, thousands of them stretching for miles, lining the roads like grotesque sentinels. The Sultan, horrified, is said to have retreated, leaving Wallachia battered but unbroken. This was Vlad, at his most ruthless, his most defiant. For him, survival was not enough. It had to come at a cost so high that even an empire would think twice before challenging him again. But survival came at a price, and Vlad's reign of terror would soon turn his allies into enemies. In Wallachia, loyalty was always for sale, and for Vlad Tepes, betrayal had a price, a steep one. To the north of Wallachia lay the Saxon cities of Transylvania. These fortified towns were rich, powerful, and fiercely independent. They were allies when it suited them. But when they turned against Vlad, that's when the blood began to flow. But what could have driven Vlad to wage war on his neighbors? It began, as so many conflicts do, with money. Saxon merchants controlled trade routes vital to Wallachia's economy. For years, they manipulated trade agreements, draining wealth from Wallachian markets. And when Vlad tried to impose order, the Saxons did what they always did. They backed his rivals. One by one, the towns of Transylvania became safe havens for boyars and pretenders to Vlad's throne. These were not mere political maneuvers. For Vlad, this was treason. His response? Swift and brutal. In 1457, Vlad launched a campaign into Saxon-held territories. Villages were burned to the ground. Men, women, and children were impaled on stakes, a warning to those who dared challenge Wallachia's sovereignty. But Vlad wasn't just fighting for power. He was sending a message. The wealth of the Saxons would no longer come at Wallachia's expense. The Saxons, however, did not sit idly by. They spread rumors of Vlad's cruelty, stories of forests of the impaled, of monstrous feasts among the dying. But was it propaganda, or was it the truth? History offers no clear answers, but one thing is certain. The Saxons learned that challenging Vlad Tepes came with a cost. And yet, this war was no victory. The devastation weakened Wallachia's economy, fractured alliances, and sowed the seeds of future betrayal. Vlad had won the battle, but had he already begun to lose the war for his throne? In 1462, Vlad faced one of his most personal battles, a war against his younger brother, Radu the Handsome. Radu, backed by the Ottoman Empire, seized the Wallachian throne. Vlad was forced to flee to Hungary, seeking refuge with Matthias Corvinus. But Hungary was no sanctuary. Corvinus, mistrusting Vlad, imprisoned him for 7 years, a captive in the shadow of political intrigue and shifting alliances. In 1475, Vlad was released. He returned to Wallachia, reclaiming the throne one last time. But his final reign would be brief. In 1476, Vlad led his army into battle against the Ottomans, but betrayal struck once more. He was ambushed and killed. Some say he was beheaded by his own men. Others say his body was taken to Constantinople as a trophy. Vlad's death marked the end of an era, but his legacy was only beginning. So, who was Vlad Tepes? A hero, a tyrant, a defender of Wallachia, or a man consumed by vengeance? History offers no simple answers, but one thing is certain: Vlad the Impaler left a mark on the world, carved in iron and blood. For all his victories, Vlad Tepes could not escape the shadow of betrayal, even within his own family.